In a cell meant to leave no room for surprises, an 18-year-old girl was found on the floor, still, quiet, and out of time. No rope, no bottle, no scene that explains itself. Just a locked door, a room the size of a hallway, and the kind of silence that makes trained people slow down. She was the youngest woman on death row, sent here at 16, now 18. 2 birthdays under the same humming light. Her world was measured in steel and routine. Meals slid through a slot. Voices came and went. She kept her head down. She did what the rules required. That's what the paperwork says. In the weeks before she was found dead, there was one approved visit on her calendar, her father. It was scheduled, cleared, and filed like any other. A chair on one side of the glass, a chair on the other, and a line in the middle that rules say you do not cross. 10 minutes early, 10 minutes late. Sign in, sign out. The kind of visit that leaves a clean trail. But the trail wasn't clean. On a night that should have been ordinary, the hallway camera outside her door went dark for 9 minutes. Not the block, not the whole tier. That one stretch of floor. A neat note called it maintenance. The timestamp said look closer. In a place that advertises eyes on everything, the one set of eyes that mattered most closed when the record needed to see. After she was gone, a medical finding changed the case from strange to impossible. Pregnant. In a no-contact cell, that word does not sit quietly on a page. You put the weeks on a calendar, you follow them square by square, and the line lands where the line is not supposed to land, on the same day her father came. She also left something behind for whoever bothered to look the hard way. Tucked deep in her bedding, hidden where a quick search would miss it, was a small note with 3 words, "Blood doesn't lie." Not a speech, not a letter, just a message meant to outlast her. Under her fingernails, the same truth held its ground. You can clean a room. You cannot clean time. People will tell you prisons are systems, and systems do not make mistakes. Badges track doors. Cameras track steps. Logs track everything else. That's how the promise is sold. But paper can be tidy when the truth is not. If a camera goes blind at the exact minute it is needed, is that an error or a decision? If the calendar points to a day that should have been safe, who signed off on safe? And what did that word really mean? This film starts at the point where those details meet. A locked room, a dark camera, a single visitor, a note hidden in cloth, and a test result that moved the ground under everyone's feet. We will set the calendar next to the camera logs. We will follow the badge pings, the door times, the sign-in sheets. We will listen to what made it into the file, and to what she tried to say when the file wasn't enough. You'll hear about policies that read like guarantees and nights that didn't follow them. You'll see how an explanation can be true on paper and false by the clock. You'll notice the small things, the crease in a form, the gap in a recording, the way a signature changes shape from one page to the next. None of these details tell the story alone. Together, they point to the space where the story hides. An 18-year-old was found dead in a place that promises constant watch. A camera looked away when proof mattered most. A visit that should have been routine became the center of questions no one wanted to ask out loud. Somewhere between the rules that were written and the reality that happened, she left a path for us to follow. We won't rush it. We will move the way the case moves, step by step, from the room to the hallway, from the hallway to the logs, from the logs to the calendar, and from the calendar back to the one truth she wrote by hand. We will keep the focus where it belongs. On a daughter who should have seen 19, and on the gap between what was promised and what was done. If everything was supposed to be seen, why did she have to hide the truth in her bedding? If routine explains this, why don't the dates and the video line up? If the system had answers ready, why did her message have to do the talking? This is where we start. The day starts the way it always does in a place like this. Lights hum to full, doors stay locked, voices move down the tier, and every stop has a purpose. A correctional officer notes the time on a handheld, taps the metal with 2 knuckles, and waits for a simple sign of life. At cell 9, the pause runs longer than the training manual expects. A second call. A third. Radio traffic tightens, not loud, just clipped, the kind of tone people use when they're trying not to alarm anyone, and everyone already knows. A supervisor steps in, glove snaps, latch turns, and for a full breath the room seems to hold itself still. Body position logged. Temperature noted. The small details that matter later are captured now. Where the blanket fell, where the cup sat on the shelf, where the light stroke hits the floor. Vitals are checked, because that's what you do even when your gut has already told you the answer. A nurse arrives with the crash cart, does what she's trained to do, speaks in short sentences that keep the moment focused. There's nothing dramatic about it. It's careful work, time called, initials recorded, the quiet understanding that the next steps belong to a different team. The supervisor secures the doorway. A strip of evidence tape runs across the jamb. A disposable camera clicks through a full roll before the digital set even boots, because old habits keep you from losing a picture to a dying battery. Someone photographs the slot, the hinges, the bolts on the bed frame, the screen over the vent. The chain of custody log starts at the threshold and never stops. Who stepped in, when they stepped out, which bag held which item, which marker sat where on the floor. It's routine in the way a seatbelt is routine. You hope you never need it. You're grateful it's there when you do. While the scene techs work, another officer pulls the overnight log from the desk and reads it like a timeline. Evening medication pass, lights out confirmation, a late-night welfare check with nothing flagged, a note about a maintenance ticket 2 doors down. Minor, unrelated, still recorded. He circles the last time anyone heard her voice. No one says much. They don't have to. In facilities like this, silence is a language and everyone is fluent. The medical examiner's transport crew stands by with a stretcher built to clear tight corners. The body bag is labeled with the inmate number and time of pronouncement. Before the zipper closes, gloved hands pause to mark small things that could get lost in memory later. A faint pressure mark on the wrist where a restraint might sit during a move, a slight smudge on a knuckle, the way the hair lies against the tile. Nothing is declared important yet. Everything is preserved as if it could be. Outside the cell, the hallway stays locked down. The TIR camera blinks, the lens pointed straight, doing what cameras are supposed to do when nothing interferes. A lieutenant works through the notification tree: warden, internal affairs, legal, medical examiner. Each name checked off with the time. HR is flagged because policy says it must be. Clergy contacted because policy allows it if family asks. The nurse who responded first takes a breath in the break room and writes a clear, simple statement. When she arrived, what she saw, what she did, why she stopped. No adjectives, just facts. That's how statements hold up. A second team begins the room inventory. Items are counted out loud, one by one, so the audio recorder catches every number. State-issued blanket, pillow, sheet, 1 paperback with the cover missing, 2 envelopes unsealed and empty, 1 plastic cup, 1 prayer card tucked behind a leg bolt. A supervisor calls for a secondary sweep, the kind that uses a small UV wand and a painter's light that throws long shadows so shallow scratches and loose fibers show themselves. It's not about finding answers on the spot. It's about refusing to miss what might become an answer later. The officer who opened the door first finishes his report at a steel desk with a pen that skips on carbon paper. He writes slow, keeps the sentences straight, makes no guesses. He's done this long enough to know that guessing costs you twice. Once in the report, again when someone who wasn't there reads it. He logs the room's feel without trying to explain it. Air cool, lights on, radio quiet. Because a good report proves you were paying attention even when you didn't yet know what you were paying attention to. Administration arrives, not with speeches, but with clipboards and questions. Was the previous welfare check on time? Were head counts reconciled against bed checks? Who carried the tier keys and who had the spares? And where did both sets sit from midnight to dawn? The answers land clean: times, names, signatures. It's the kind of early clarity that calms people who've been here before. It doesn't last, but for now it helps the work move forward. The transport team takes the body. The techs reset their markers and shoot one last sequence. Doorway to bed, bed to drain, drain to light, light to door. So the path of a person moving through that space is captured frame by frame. The seal goes on, the tag number is read aloud, and the room becomes waiting. Waiting for toxicology, waiting for camera pulls, waiting for the list of who scanned where and when. Downstairs, someone has already requested the overnight video from the corridor: standard pull, standard retention, standard backup. Nobody expects trouble yet. This is just how it's done. In records, the phone starts to ring more than usual. Legal wants copies of policy pages for isolation housing. Medical wants prior notes. Internal Affairs wants badge skin exports for the tier and the doors that feed into it. The clerk prints what she can, cues what she can't, and flags anything that needs a signature she doesn't have. It's the steady part of the job, the part that runs even when emotions try to pull ahead. When the warden steps onto the tier, no one crowds him. He doesn't crowd the scene. He looks once, long enough to tell the truth when someone asks him what he saw later. He asks the nurse if she needs a break. She says she's fine. He tells her to take one anyway. He walks the length of the corridor and back, hands behind his back because he doesn't want to touch a thing, and then he signs the log like everyone else. Outside, the sun has been up for an hour, but this hallway doesn't change with weather. The air stays the same. The light stays the same. The only thing that changes is the list of questions, and that list is getting longer by the minute. Who last spoke to her? Who last saw movement through the window? Who checked the latch? Who signed out the kit? Who can confirm the times without looking them up? It's not drama. It's work. Back in the office, the first internal incident report takes shape. It reads the way these reports are supposed to read. Concise, factual, free of opinions. The expected boxes are ticked, notifications made, body removed, scene preserved, logs requested. There's a line that says cause of death, pending. There's another that says further review required. Both are true. For anyone who hasn't seen this kind of day, the pace feels slow, even when everything is happening at once. For the people who have, it's the only pace that works. You don't rush your way into answers you can trust. You document your way there. And as the morning edges into afternoon, one simple reality settles over the tier. Despite all the procedures done exactly right, no one can yet say why an 18-year-old died in a locked room that was supposed to keep her alive at least until the state said otherwise. That absence isn't a hole you fill with guesses. It's a space you mark off and protect until the evidence tells you what belongs inside it. For now, the cell is sealed, the forms are filed, the requests are in, the camera pulls are underway, and the report ends the only way it can at this stage, with a promise that the next pages will matter more than the first. They couldn't see a cause of death yet. She did not start as a case number. She started as a kid from a small county where Friday nights meant ball games under bright bulbs, and the fairgrounds smelled like kettle corn and hay, where a bus driver knew who sat where, and a guidance counselor kept a drawer of granola bars for students who skipped breakfast. Teachers remember a quiet girl who colored past the lines only when she was shading the sky, a left-handed sketcher who kept a stub of pencil tucked behind her ear, who could fix a wobbly chair in shop class faster than most boys. Home was a two-bedroom rental with thin walls, a TV that only pulled 3 local stations, and a front step that always needed paint. Her mother worked nights at a laundry and learned how to sleep through trucks downshifting on the highway. Her father was around when she was little, then not, then back again and starts. The kind of presence that sends a kid to the window at the sound of a pickup because hope is a habit, not a plan. By 16, she was making choices with adult consequences, some hers, some made for her, by people who were older and louder and better at telling their version first. The night that changed everything did not look like the start of a capital case on paper. A borrowed room in a budget motel, a handful of bad decisions, a teenager who did not wake up, and a police report that gathered speed as it rolled. Prosecutors called it murder tied to an underlying felony, used words like intent and recklessness the way mechanics use wrenches, and they built a story that moved quickly from charge to verdict. She was tried as an adult, convicted, and at 16 walked into a courtroom where the sentence did not match the age of the shoes she wore. Appeals thinned out, the calendar filled, and the state moved her to the unit no family ever wants to see, the one that keeps a separate key drawer and a separate set of rules. Intake was a checklist. Clothing swapped for a uniform stamped with numbers, property bagged and tagged, a photo taken against a height chart with lines she already knew from TV. Her first cell was smaller than the room she shared with her cousin growing up, the mattress thin, the pillow flatter than it looked in the brochure they hand to lawmakers. Life settled into hard edges. 23 hours in, 1 hour alone in a fenced run when weather allowed. Showers on a rotating schedule, lights that dim but never go away. A slot for meals and meds and paperwork. Any visit happened through glass with a handset, recorded and timed, and nothing that could pass for touch was allowed. Not a handshake, not a quick brush of fingers. Mail was opened outside her presence and shaken out for contraband. Legal mail was handled by a separate chain that looked careful on paper and sometimes was. Phones worked on a schedule, minutes rationed like sugar in a pantry. Every number cleared, every call recorded. Cameras watched doors and corridors from multiple angles, a hum in the background like an extra air vent, and logs kept count of scans and door pops, and who held keys from shift to shift. The officers on her tier learned her rhythms without trying. When she pressed her palm flat to the wall to stretch her shoulder, when she lined up the edges of the sheet so it didn't twist under her back, when she stood on the paint scuff by the door to catch the only slice of warm light that reached the floor. In late afternoon, a nurse saw her once a week for vitals. A counselor asked set questions with yes or no boxes and left a comment line at the bottom that only mattered if a person was ready to put a fear into words. She read what she could get through the library card, mostly paperbacks missing their covers, and a Bible with a cracked spine. And she worked through a GED packet one section at a time, because learning gives a day a shape when all the days look the same. She wrote to a former teacher who answered with careful encouragement, and to a cousin who sent Polaroids of a new puppy with ears too big for its head. Staff who believed in clean boundaries kept it steady and fair. No extra, no less. Because fairness is the only way to stand upright in a place built on rules. Others did their jobs by the book, but treated quiet like emptiness, which it isn't. Quiet is work. Quiet is keeping your thoughts in order when the room tries to scatter them. Her father reappeared through the proper channel, filled out the forms, waited for clearance, and got a date on the calendar like anyone else who passes the checks. The paperwork around him was clean: address, ID, signature, and a notice went to the unit office the way it always did. None of this changed the rules of her day-to-day, but it put a pin on a page her mind could not stop circling. Ask a person in isolation what helps, and you'll get practical answers. Hot water that lasts, shoes that fit, pins that don't run dry, a clock that keeps time. Ask what keeps them human, and you'll hear about small rituals. Folding a sheet corner just so, tracing a sentence from a book onto a scrap of envelope, counting breaths to a number that calms a racing thought. She knotted her hair with a rubber band made from a glove cuff, kept her cup upside down so dust stayed out, and tapped out math problems on the mattress seam, half habit, half proof that she could still hold a pattern. On good days she wrote full pages, on hard days a line or two. And sometimes she just stared at the paint and tried to remember the way the sky looks right before a storm breaks, not for drama, just because that kind of memory is relief. Officers rotated every 12 hours and learned to read the difference between a request and a plea, which matters in a place where both are rare. The chaplain stopped by the door once a week, offered a prayer without pushing, left a pamphlet with a phone number for grief counseling that felt out of place and exactly right at the same time. Her legal team sent updates that said little and promised less, the language of paperwork that doesn't want to close a door but knows how slow hinges move. People on the outside sometimes think time on death row is all fear and noise. The truth is it's mostly chores and waiting and doing the next small thing well, because that's how a person holds on to herself. When she spoke in those months, it was short and steady. Yes, ma'am. No, sir. Thank you. Nothing that made the shift pass stories along, except once when she asked for a second envelope because the first one tore, and the officer handed it over without a word because kindness doesn't need an announcement. Her file thickened with routine entries that looked almost as if a template wrote them. Welfare check complete, meal delivered, medication accepted, property verified. Each line a brick in a wall that says everything is working. The truth of a person's life rarely fits inside those lines. What fits instead are hints. The sketch of a horizon tucked inside a law library request slip, a line from a song written along the edge of a grievance form. The way she pressed a handprint into a legal pad and traced it like a promise to herself that she was still here, before any headlines. Before anyone outside the fence cared. That is who she was. An 18-year-old who had learned to make a day out of very little, who counted wins in single digits, who tried to be someone her younger self would recognize. The case that brought her here remained what it had been in the record: fast, loud, harsh, and the unit remained what it had been built to be: tight, watched, controlled. If you want to understand what comes next, you have to stand in that room with her the way it was before anything changed. You have to feel how small choices matter when big choices are gone. And you have to see how a person can be steady and careful and still end up at the center of questions that stretch far past one cell door. That is the context, the ground underfoot. The part that proves she was more than a file number long before anyone asked why the file stopped growing. The visitor calendar logged one name and one appointment, cleared a week in advance, confirmed by phone the night before. Arrivals like his start at the front gate with ID checks under a fluorescent wand, pockets turned out, metal detector twice if the first pass chirps, shoes off if the belt won't stop beeping. A property locker swallows keys and a phone, a paper wristband prints with a time window and a barcode. A cheap pen scratches a signature on a clipboard that has seen 1,000 names. Before his. A CO stamps the back of his hand with ink you can only see under a blue light. Another checks the stamp anyway because the habit matters. The walk to the booth is long on purpose. First through a cold corridor where polish never masks the smell of cleanser, then past a painted line no one crosses without a scan, and finally to a chair on one side of glass that never opens. The handset between them is sturdy, the kind that forgives being slammed, and it records by default whether you remember or not. She arrives 3 minutes after he sits, escorted at a pace just short of hurried, eyes level, hands visible, posture that says she knows how this goes. The glass throws back two faces that look related in the corners, jawline, brow, a certain way of blinking when they're listening. Family resemblance that shows up even when love is complicated. He says her name like he's testing it for fit. She answers in the small voice she saves for rooms that take sound and flatten it. They settle into the measured rhythm of a monitored talk. How are you eating? Are you getting sleep? Did the lawyer call? Did the church lady send a card? She asks a simple question she already knows the answer to. Did he bring the photos he promised? And he taps the glass with 2 fingers to show empty hands and says the officer at intake said no. Photos aren't on the list. The clock on the wall runs forward. A CO stands at an angle where both faces are in one line of sight, and when the call hits the mark, the handset goes quiet whether a person is done speaking or not. Sign out is as exact as sign in. Stamp checked, wristband cut, badge beep, locker opened, property returned with an initial and a nod. His truck starts with that rattling belt sound that makes mechanics frown. The taillights roll toward the highway, and on paper the visit is finished and clean. She is walked back the way she came, shoes soft on sealed seams in the floor, a second officer trailing by rule, and the door closes behind her with a sound that has marked her days for 2 years. Evening runs like it always does, meds round, a short shower, lights dim to a level that still finds the edges of a room, a final voice from the corridor that says the time and the tier and the nothing to report that helps people sleep. The building's cameras show pathways like a sewn quilt, stitches. At each intersection, steady frames in gray and green. Timestamps marching across the bottom where no one looks until they have to. At 2:48 a.m., the feed for the corridor outside her door drops to black. There is no flicker first, no smear of light, no drift in focus that hints at a failing lens, just picture then not picture. A clean cut that would be easy to miss if you weren't watching the seconds. In the server room, the recorder's LED keeps its calm blink, and the other hallways keep rolling as if nothing happened. 9 minutes pass in a way that doesn't pass anywhere else. At 2:57, the picture returns like a switch came back to where it belongs. The empty corridor, the door to her cell closed, the strip of tape on the frame undisturbed, the same scuff on the floor where boots always pivot, the same burn mark on the light cover that maintenance keeps promising to replace. The log for the camera lists the gap as maintenance mode, which is a code that asks you not to worry. Trouble tickets are checked. No calls to the on-call tech. No prior note to schedule a takedown. Redundancy that usually reroutes a feed during a glitch shows no reroute. The access control system in another office has its own memory. Every badge beep at the gate, every door pop in the chain, every request that asked the software to believe a person had the right to be where they were. Just after the feed drops, an entry appears that isn't supposed to exist on that unit without 2 people present. An administrative override flag with a 4-digit code and a note that reads acknowledged. The officer assigned to the tier writes his hourly check like always. Quiet, no movement at window, lights steady. And that line goes into the record because that's what records do. Upstairs, the handset room shows no calls placed after lights out. The mail cart sits where the clerk left it. The infirmary med fridge logs a normal temperature at 3 a.m. with an automatic ping, and the duty lieutenant emails a short reminder to send in weekend schedules before noon. The kind of message that proves the rest of the night believed it was ordinary. When the building wakes, the system behaves like systems do. The camera with the dark gap plays just fine. The report that labels the gap looks neat. And the people who rely on those tools assume the tools are telling the whole truth. The first person who feels the shape of the 9 minutes is a young IT tech who wasn't hired to be a detective. He's there to keep servers cool and names spelled right on logins. He notices the gap because he runs a script that flags feeds that went offline, and most of the time it's a loose coax or a cleaner who knocked a plug halfway out with a cart. This isn't that. The metadata says someone told the camera to stop, not that the camera failed. He checks the past month and finds a cousin too. This gap on the same corridor. A twin, down to the second. He pulls the access logs for the same window and sees the acknowledged line again where there should be nothing at all. In a different office, a sergeant compares the schedule from the day of the visit to the duty roster for the overnight. Not because she expects a match, but because a habit like that has saved her grief before. She circles 3 names for later questions and writes a 4th on a sticky note that she tucks under her keyboard because instincts sometimes need a place to rest before they make sense. None of this has found a why yet. It has found a when and a where and a how that the rulebook didn't plan to explain. The visit sits on the calendar like a thumbtack. The blackout sits on the timeline like a missing tooth. The gap between them is what the next chapter has to cross. 9 minutes may not sound like much inside a locked unit. It is long enough to change a life and short enough for someone to hope no one will notice. Someone noticed. The medical examiner's suite is quiet by design. Stainless tables under steady light. Instruments laid out in a row that never changes. Her body arrives with tags that match the tier log, the seal number read aloud, and a brief silence that isn't procedure but respect. The external exam begins with what can be seen without guessing. Height, weight, scars that match intake photos. Faint pressure marks at the wrists measured with a paper tape. Trace red at the nail beds lifted with a damp swab end. Sealed. There are no deep wounds, no ligature pattern on the neck, no injection site that calls attention to itself. Temperature points to early morning as the window of death, consistent with what the staff recorded when they first entered. The examiner notes the room's earlier inventory. A torn thread along the hem of a sheet, a stitch that looked newer than the rest, and asks for the bedding to be delivered before it's laundered. While techs retrieve it, blood and urine samples are drawn for a standard toxicology screen. Alcohol, common opioids, benzos, stimulants. The fast panel gets a first pass while the comprehensive test is queued for the state lab. The abdominal exam pauses at the uterus, slightly enlarged for age and build. A rapid HCG test runs in the corner like a pregnancy test in a bathroom, only calibrated for chain of custody. It turns positive, the kind of result that doesn't depend on opinion. Internal. Measurements line up with that quick read and put gestation at roughly 11 weeks. No signs of miscarriage, no trauma to the fetus. Whatever else happened here, it wasn't a pregnancy failing on its own. A nurse who's worked with the examiner for 15 years writes the number in the margin of her worksheet and draws a small box around it, so it can't be missed downstream. The bedding arrives in brown paper, not plastic, so Trace will breathe and not sweat itself away. Under a painter's light, a subtle lift along one seam shows a tiny tuck where the weave isn't factory. A single stitch is clipped and a folded square slides into a gloved palm. Ink tight, letters close. 3 words that are short enough to carry and heavy enough to stand up in court. Blood doesn't lie. It is photographed in place, photographed out of place, logged on its own evidence line, and placed in a small envelope inside a larger one so no one has to open it again unless a judge says so. Back at the table, fingernail scrapings go into microtubes. Right hand, then left, collected with care so the swab touches skin once and only once. A few dark fibers taken from the sheet are taped to cards, each labeled with a grid so the lab can track how they compare to uniform fabric or laundry lint later. A tech runs a luminol pass on the undersides of the bed frame and the drain lip. Not because there is visible blood, but because good habits are cheap and missed evidence is not. Faint reaction near the frame supports that hands moved there recently. Weak but real. Documented with long exposure photos that freeze the blue in a way the eye can't. The fast toxicology panel pings with a dry printout. No ethanol, no obvious opiates, no amphetamines on the quick screen, negatives that matter only as placeholders until the full panel returns. The preliminary cause reads as undetermined pending histology and tox, which is honest and right. The examiner dictates a note for the file that pregnancy at 11 weeks would have triggered an automatic legal pause on any execution if it had been declared, a fact that matters not as commentary, but as context. The calendar that investigators have been building now has a simple line to lay over it. 11 weeks back from today. And when that line lands on the square marked with her father's visit, the room goes still in a way the audio won't capture. The note from the bedding is compared to her known writing from intake forms and library slips. Same hand, same pressure on downstrokes, provisional match until a document expert signs off. A separate team in a different room opens the evidence bag from earlier, the scrapings from the nails, and begins DNA extraction, a process that offers no theater, just small tubes, a vortex mixer, and patience. The first result they can see quickly is simple. The sample contains her DNA and something else. Not enough yet to name a person. Enough to say she wasn't alone in whatever happened to her hands. The access logs requested that morning finally hit a desk near the examiner's office. Door beeps, badge numbers, a 4-digit administrative override that shouldn't appear without a second authorization. Facts for investigators more than for doctors. But when cases turn on time, everybody reads the clock. One of the nurses returns the pregnancy test cassette to its pouch and writes the date and time across the label in a careful hand. This is the kind of small item that disappears when people are careless, and no one is careless today. A courier signs for the sealed boxes, toxicology, histology, DNA, and walks them to a state vehicle like he's carrying glass, because he is. The examiner closes the file for now with a line that says additional results pending, evidence preserved, findings communicated to law enforcement. Outside the suite, a detective posts the number 11 on a whiteboard and draws an arrow back to a visit that never should have mattered this much. In a folder marked personal effects, the note sits between acid-free sheets, the words simple enough for a jury, strong enough for a family, when someone reads them out loud. Early findings do not give a cause, but they give shape. A pregnancy that could not have occurred without contact. A timeline that doesn't bend, a message hidden to be found, and biological trace that says her last moments left a record on her hands. The phone to the warden's office rings with the courtesy call no one wants to make, and the voice on the other end says they understand and will cooperate. The language of institutions when the ground is starting to move. For all the weight of the day, the work stays steady, clean steps, clear labels, no leaps. What happens next will depend on patterns, not hunches. Camera gaps that repeat, logs that echo one another, signatures that don't match from page to page. If the truth here lives in the spaces people thought were empty, the pattern will pull it into view. Young IT tech who first noticed the 9 minutes doesn't let it sit. He runs a query that lines up every camera on the row for the last 6 months and color codes the outages. Most gaps are seconds long and scatter at random the way power bumps do. But a thin line of red blocks repeats on one corridor at almost the same hour, 2:48 to 2:57, a neat row that marches across the calendar like someone set a reminder. He prints the timestamps and lays them next to access control data pulled from the door system. Badges tell their own story, time, door, holder, and on 3 of those nights, a single administrative override appears where policy says 2 authorizations should stand. Shoulder to shoulder. The software labels it acknowledged, which only happens when a human agrees to it. He checks for the second signature and finds none. In a separate office, a sergeant who has lived long enough with rosters to smell when a schedule hides something draws circles around shifts that share the same overnight crew. The circles overlap more than she likes. She adds the visit date on the edge of the page and draws an arrow. This kind of picture isn't proof, but it refuses to be ignored. The paper trail in medical starts to bend the same way. The medication fridge has a log that ticks every hour by itself, and the count on controlled sedatives is handwritten beside it. A day nurse flags a 1-vial discrepancy from 3 weeks back. The night nurse's note says breakage, replaced, but there is no matching waste form. And the shard bag that would prove a bottle shattered never hit the bin. When pharmacy audits the month, 3 signatures on the sign-out sheet share a slant that looks like the same hand rushing to be 3 different people. A supervisor calls it sloppy. The sergeant calls it a pattern and asks for camera clips from the infirmary door on the nights the numbers don't square. Security video shows the door open twice after midnight with a badge that belongs to someone who wasn't scheduled there. The explanation on paper says called to assist. The radio log shows no call. Internal Affairs asks for printer histories from the admin office. Someone pulled a stack of fresh maintenance forms at 2:40 a.m. on one of the blackout nights. But no work orders were filed and no parts were signed out of supply. The maintenance cart parked near that corridor shows scuff marks on the caster that match a turn outside the camera's view. When they open the cart's drawers, the tamper seals look intact until a tech rubs a thumb along one edge and the glue rolls back like it was lifted and pressed down again. The officer keys who were supposed to stay in the control room are accounted for, but a second set kept in a safe as a disaster backup was signed out last month for inventory and never signed back in. And the person who logged the removal is on leave. An assistant warden says the safe list is old and will be corrected. The sergeant writes the earlier list in ink at the top of her pad, so it can't be quietly replaced in conversation. Across the tier, inmates who watch everything because watching is what the day gives them start to send kites, short notes folded to the size of a sugar packet, each saying in their own way that footsteps came and went when the monitor showed nothing, that a key turned when no count was called, that a towel shoved under a door crack muffled sounds on the night none of them were supposed to hear anything. Most of these notes arrive with hedges because hedges keep people safe, but a few carry details that match logs nobody outside the bubble should know. An exact minute, a set of boots with a heel squeak, the smell of hospital alcohol in a place that shouldn't carry it at 3 a.m. Staff statements are collected again and now sound tighter than the first round. People remember less when questions get closer to names. Even so, a medical assistant admits a vial count fell off, and that when she asked about it, a supervisor told her to put the clipboard away and focus on patients. She wrote a memo to herself and date-stamped it the way her old boss taught her, tucked it in the back of a binder where it sat until today. On the technical side, the IT kid and a senior contractor traced the camera blackout to a permissions change that toggled maintenance mode on a specific channel with a shortcut. The feature exists for safe service, but new rules were supposed to require a second password. The log shows the second credential never came. The contractor asks who controls the permission group and finds that 3 users were added during a staffing shuffle and never removed after the shuffle ended. One of those accounts was set to never expire. The contractor prints the permission tree and tape tacks it to a wall. Lines cross and recross like a badly planned street map. Audit pulls door strikes from stairwells that cut behind the main hall. The route would let someone bypass the main lens, cross 30 feet of blind concrete, and return behind the glass. The paint scrape on a stair rail shows fresh metal. The lab says the gray flakes match the color used on tool belts issued in the shop. Supply says 2 belts went missing in January. A lieutenant opens a box of grievance forms and finds a stack that should have been scanned 6 weeks ago. One complains about an officer who lingers near female housing for no stated reason. The signature is hard to read. The date matches a night with a red block on the IT kid's printout, another grievance. Mentions a whisper through the food slot that made the writer move her mattress to the opposite wall. When the sergeant reads that line, she writes the cell number in big letters and circles it. It is 3 doors from cell 9. The access control system coughs up a second oddity. On 2 blackout nights, someone used a test badge number to open the utility closet in the 3C corridor. Test badges are assigned to training units and should never open live doors. The code was enabled by a global setting months ago when the facility swapped vendors and never fully deactivated. The IT kid disables it with 2 clicks, leans back, and says quietly that if he can do that in a minute, someone else could have done it to turn it on. Internal Affairs requests phone pings for staff devices that were supposed to stay in lockers. At least 1 phone traveled with a person onto the tier at 2:50 a.m. on a blackout night. Policy says that can get you written up. Context says it might tell you who stood where when the camera went dark. In evidence, the lab calls with an early DNA note. The scrapings under her right-hand nails carry more than one profile. It will take longer to separate them cleanly, but plurality is enough to close the door on any story that says her hands didn't touch a struggle. A separate lab confirms the stitch from the sheet wasn't factory, meaning someone with access, time, and awareness of searches made that pocket. The sergeant returns to the timeline and uses a red marker for events that required inside knowledge, toggling maintenance mode without a ticket, opening a stairwell with a training code, removing a backup key set, entering medical without a call, and entering or attempting to enter a cell area without a logged reason. The red marks pile up in the same hours and touch the same positions. None of it names a person by itself. Together it tells you where to look. The warden is briefed in a meeting. That feels colder than the room. He is told there is a pattern of 9-minute blackouts tied to door events that should not exist, that medical paperwork around sedatives is thin where it should be thick, and that the hallway in question has more activity on the quietest hours than the written record admits. He says what administrators say in careful moments. We will cooperate. Send me the list. Keep me informed. And he means it in a way that sounds tired. Before the hour ends, investigators request a third sweep of Cell 9. Not because they expect a miracle, but because experience has taught them the last look finds what the first two missed. They bring a longer light and a soft brush and work low where eyes don't linger. The brush lifts grit from the underside of the frame, and the light catches something shallow and straight, too regular to be a scratch left by shoes. The tech squints, holds the light at an angle, and sees that someone once put a message where only patients could read it. What it says will not match any form in the building. The soft brush clears the grit and the light angles in, and the marks become letters, shallow but deliberate, a sentence thin as a thread stretched across steel. He's not the only one. The room changes without moving, because a message like that is not a guess. It is a record left by someone who knew where hands would look last. The techs photograph it with a ruler edge, then a gel lift pulls trace from the groove. And when the lab calls back later, they say the skin cells are too few to profile cleanly, but the point stands without a name. A footwear chart laid beside fine dust prints under the frame shows two sizes, one that fits the officer already on the short list, and another that matches a different boot allotment from supply. The sergeant who has been connecting dots adds a second badge number to her board and draws a line from the infirmary door to the cabinet where sedatives were signed out without a proper waste form. The investigator working the family angle serves a warrant with language that leaves no room for confusion, and a court orders a DNA sample from the father because the timeline and the pregnancy cannot be left to chance. The result comes back from the state lab in language no one can argue with, a paternity index that does the work without adjectives. And the paper slides across a desk to a prosecutor who has tried hard cases and knows when a number closes a door. Before noon, two teams move at once. One to pick up the father at his residence, the other to meet an officer just as he clears the Sally Port at shift change. Both arrests are quiet by design, cuffs fronted for transport, no extra words, and the only sound in the hallway after is the squeak of a cartwheel that still needs grease. A warrant for a second officer follows 2 days later after the test badge audit, and the stairwell route tie a person to a place and a time during one of the 9-minute gaps. Interviews run in rooms with digital clocks and water left untouched. The father says little, a lawyer at his side. The recording light steady. One officer says the system is wrong, that someone else used his credentials, then cannot explain why a handset in the tier recorded his voice giving a location check during the minute the feed went black. The other officer starts with a shrug and ends with a silence that feels heavier than anger. And when shown the infirmary camera stills that place. Him in a doorway where he was not scheduled. He asks for a break and never finds a better answer. The charging sheet grows in measured steps. Sexual assault of an inmate in custody, misconduct, evidence tampering, homicide counts that follow from the death in a locked cell. And the booking photos reach the evening news with the faces half-lit the way garage lights do when doors open at dusk. At the preliminary hearing, the courtroom is full but quiet. The way people get when they know what they're about to hear will not be easy. The state calls the examiner first, and she speaks in clean sentences. Gestation measured at about 11 weeks. No sign of a miscarriage. No injury that explains death by itself. Findings preserved. Note recovered from bedding. The words read into the record without theater. A document analyst testifies next to confirm the handwriting on the hidden note. Matches samples from her intake and library slips. Then the IT kid, suddenly in a suit, explains the 9-minute blocks with a confidence that comes from hours alone with code, describes maintenance mode toggled without a service ticket, permission groups that were left too open, and a test badge that never should have opened a real door. The access logs appear on a screen as simple lines that anyone can follow: time, door, badge. And the pattern draws itself. The state's next exhibit is a short clip from a handheld used for welfare checks in the unit, the kind recorded during a period when the camera feed was unreliable for a stretch in winter. The clip is without sound by policy, but it shows her standing under the light, looking directly into the lens, lips moving with care, and a court-approved expert reads the words from her mouth. "I am not safe. He comes when it's quiet. Please don't let this be ignored." No one cheers. No one gasps. They just sit with it. The defense pushes back where the ground will hold. Chain of custody questions, the possibility of contamination on nail scrapings, the risk of lip-reading error, and the judge sustains and overrules with even weight. But the filings already in evidence do most of the talking. The lab analyst explains the DNA under her nails contains more than one male profile, not enough in that sample to name both men, but enough to rule out the idea that her hands held nothing. A separate geneticist walks through the paternity report and points to the numbers that reach across any attempt to suggest coincidence. The pharmacy auditor steps up with the sedative ledger and shows the nights where a vial count dipped and the signature lines grew rushed, and then the video still that catches a uniformed figure at the infirmary door without a call. The judge binds the case over. Bail is denied on flight risk and danger grounds, and dates are set that feel too far out for the people in the first row and too close for the defendants. Outside, the microphones collect statements. Family who say they trusted the rules and were failed by them. Advocates who ask for independent oversight. A department spokesperson who promises cooperation and reminds everyone of due process. Inside the building, Internal Affairs runs a deeper permissions pull and finds an old memo authorizing a temporary change to camera controls during a staffing transition that was never rolled back, signed off by a captain who left 3 months ago without a clean exit interview. And the memo's distribution list includes a name no one has said out loud yet in these hearings. Back at the cell, the third sweep pays off the way patient work often does, along the underside lip where the bed meets the wall. Another set of letters barely rises out of the paint, the kind that only appear when a flashlight passes at the right angle. Check the drain. Maintenance pulls the grate and finds a wad of cloth wrapped around a pen casing kept dry with a strip of plastic. Inside, a folded note from a neighbor who was moved weeks earlier. A message that says she heard what others pretended not to hear, and that there was more than one set of steps in that hallway on more than one night. The prosecutor adds the letter to a growing list of exhibits, and the judge seals the witness name for protection. As the first trial days end, the case feels shaped but not complete, like a puzzle with corners set and the middle still in the box. The father sits under bright courtroom lights, the officers at separate tables with their lawyers, and the state's timeline stands without leaning on drama. "He's not the only one" is no longer a hint etched in steel. It is a theme the evidence keeps repeating. Still, one question hangs at the edge of every frame. If keys moved and codes changed and cameras went dark, who higher up signed forms that made it possible, and why hasn't that name been called to the stand yet? The courtroom fills before the doors officially open. Rows of plain suits and winter coats, a few hand-painted signs left outside with security because rules are rules. The jury files in without looking left or right. The foreperson stands, and the words that follow are steady and final. Guilty on the counts that matter. The father does not flinch, a jaw set in a way that says he already knew, while two officers at separate tables stare at the same spot on the floor as if it might give them a different ending. Sentencing comes later that week and reads like a ledger: life without parole for him. Maximum federal time for both officers. Terms to run consecutive. Supervised release that will never happen because the years outlast a life. The judge explains the law in calm language and then adds one line that is not required but lands like a weight. The state failed to protect someone it promised to protect, and the court will not pretend otherwise. In the front row, a former teacher holds a folded note the girl once mailed from the unit, the paper gone soft from being read. And a cousin who sent puppy photos wipes a face that has not slept. Outside, microphones gather statements, and for once the sound bites are not the story. The story is the people who stay when cameras pull away. The mother who chooses to speak into a quiet hall instead of a lens, and says her daughter was more than a file, and that she wants the next girl to live long enough to roll her eyes at her daddy for something small and harmless. The state announces an internal audit the same afternoon, and a federal letter follows by week's end, calling for an independent monitor at the facility and at any other unit that houses women under isolation. Policy shifts start with simple fixes that should have been simple all along. Camera channels locked, so they cannot be switched off without 2 live approvals, and an alert sent to 3 desks at once. Backup recorders placed in a room with a separate power line, and a physical seal that breaks red if touched. Test badges are killed, training codes wiped, and a clean list is posted where everyone can see it with a date that makes it hard to quietly backslide. The medical chain is tightened to a pin stroke. Waste logs match to bottle lots, shard bags sealed on the spot with a number that shows up in a database the pharmacy controls, audit trails that flag on their own when the count dips by 1. Door overrides are now 2 key, 2 name, 2 camera, with a chime that sounds in the control room and a light that stays on until the system sees both credentials go home. A new form appears at the unit desk that looks small, but is not. A fixed box that asks if an inmate reported feeling unsafe, and a second box that records who was told and when. And if those boxes are blank by the end of a shift, a supervisor has to sign their own name under the blanks. The Inspector General opens a review that does not end at the tier door and requests emails with authorization notes for permission changes, the memo that set camera maintenance to a shortcut, and the exit paperwork for a captain whose name keeps showing up at the edge of the timeline. 2 resignations arrive without speeches, a 3rd person takes medical leave, and a 4th hires counsel. None of that returns a life, but it shows that a path runs past the men already in cuffs. In the city, a candlelight vigil circles the courthouse steps, poster boards with a smiling 12-year-old taped beside a sketch she made in shop class. A pastor reads a psalm about truth standing up on its own, and a neighbor tells a story about a kid who used to lug groceries up 2 flights for an older man without waiting for a thank you. On the prison fence across town, someone threads ribbon through the chain link at the height of her shoulders, and by morning the wind has blown the ends into simple lines that flutter like small flags. The documentary team that filed public records requests begins to receive envelopes, some official, some anonymous. Copies of old grievances that were never logged. A training slide that shows how to bypass a camera during service with a button no longer on the screen. A photo of a maintenance cart with the drawer seal lifted and pressed back. Lawmakers schedule a hearing and give it a title that fits on a banner. The families who show up ask for plain things: non-interruptible surveillance and isolation units, a way to report harm that does not go back to the people named, and outside medical exams when an inmate speaks up about assault. A bill is drafted to require an external ombuds office with a phone line that rings past the fence, and to fund trauma counseling not after a headline, but as part of the day-to-day. At the facility, officers who did their jobs cleanly through all of this stand a little taller because someone finally says out loud what they have said for years in break rooms. That fairness is the only way to stay human in a hard place. The chaplain writes the date in a tiny notebook and notes a change in tone on the tier, not louder, just less resigned. A new warden walks the corridor without a press scrum, stops by the nurse station to ask what they need, and hears answers that cost less than a lawsuit: stable staffing, a printer that doesn't jam, a door hinge that doesn't shriek at 3 a.m. The state lab finishes the DNA work on the nail scrapings and identifies the second male profile as one of the officers already sentenced, a late result that seals a corner of the puzzle and shuts down a rumor that had tried to grow. A civil suit files on behalf of the family and names higher officials by title, the language firm and spare, asking for acknowledgement, for change, and for the record to show what was done and not done when warning signs stacked up. Murals appear on underpasses in 3 cities, her face painted from a school photo. Eyes steady. The caption simple: she was real. The The podcast that first covered the case airs a quiet update in which the former teacher reads the hidden note out loud and leaves space after each word so it can land. Blood doesn't lie. The last court date for the year ends without surprise. Appeals noted, bonds denied. And the file that once read like routine now sits on a shelf marked with a colored stripe that means there are lessons inside. In the closing minutes of this story, a maintenance worker replaces the vent cover in cell 9 with one that cannot be removed without tripping an alarm, and before he stands he smooths the floor where a scuff used to sit and rests a hand on the bolt as if to promise he did his part. Out in the parking lot, the cousin with the puppy photos clicks a leash and says her name once to the night air because saying it matters. A clock that once meant everything still reads 2:57 on a printout in an evidence box, but clocks are only tools. The truth here was carried by a calendar square, a stitch in a sheet, a scratched sentence, a number on a lab report, and the steady courage of a girl who found a way to leave a message in a place built to erase them. The verdicts gave shape, the policy changes gave steps, and the question that remains is the one we were handed at the start. How many secrets still sit in rooms like this? And will the next person have to carve their truth into metal to be heard? If you enjoy this video, like the video, subscribe, and drop a comment with the next case you want us to cover.